A Brother's Confession by Robbie MacNiven, read by dyslexic little me. A Warhammer 40,000 short story. Once, before it had been carved from its bedrock and cast adrift among the stars, the chapel of the Dewsbury had been a high, cold place. Mountain raptors had called it their home as readily as the lonely pilgrims who had trekked through snow drifts and along knife-backed ridges to reach it. Stories were told among the primary space marines that fragile bones of birds and woven votive offerings left by worshippers could still be found in its darkest corners. Castor, who frequented the chapel more than any of them, had certainly never come across such relics. They had long since crumbled to dust, for it had been 10,000 years since the Dewsbury had lain heaped beneath mountain snow or moaned with the bitterness of a midwinter wind. 10 millennia had gone by since it had been uprooted and rebuilt stone by stone on board the battle barge Spear of Macraish. Now its pilgrims were god warriors of the former 13th Legion, and its attendant Castor wore the skull helm of an Adeptus Astartes chaplain. He donned that helmet now, though there was no immediate threat of battle. The black armor and vestments of a chaplain were as ceremonial as they were functional. They represented the wearer's grave charge to uphold the faith and purity of his battle brothers and act as both judge and executioner for those who failed. In that moment, as the Spear of Macraish traversed the currents of the warp on its way from combat operations in the Atari system, Castor stood in judgment. "It is time, brother." The accused had surrendered himself of his own volition, and now knelt before Castor and the chapter's altar, shrouded in the black cloth of judgment. His name was Polixis, and he was the apothecary of the Fulminata, one of the strike forces of primary space marines who a century earlier had joined the Ultramarines chapter. Light from the tallow candles set around the chamber flickered along the strong lines of his face and gave his blond hair a deeper golden sheen. "Speak now before the Emperor's sight." The ritual words rang through the chamber, scraping from the vox vocalizer of Castor's helmet like an executioner's blade across a whetstone. Polixis was silent before answering. His head dipped, as though he was trying to find the words that would most succinctly, convey his guilt. "I killed my battle brother," he said eventually, his low but firm his voice. Castor remained still. Polixis raised his burning gaze to meet the chaplain's darkened visor. "I killed Artimeus Tullio of the Fulminata." 5 days earlier, the Delasario Manor house shook with gunfire, screams, and the fury of the primary space marines. The Fulminata rarely tested defeat, and yet on this day their objective was slipping away. Polixis launched 2 shots from his bolt pistol. Baka baka! The hard rounds punched through the charging Tachari supplicator's bare breast and burst open his chest cavity. The man, clad only in the white loincloth and a silver hook-nosed mask, dropped instantly. 2 of his cult kindred threw themselves into adjacent doorways. A spray of las fire whipped into the dark stone bark panels that lined the hallway as they attempted to keep the Primaris apothecary at bay, forcing him to one side. Polixis advanced, using speed to close the distance before either cultist could pin him down. He slammed another shot into the door frame that sheltered one of them. A hail of splinters ripped through the man's torso. He dropped screaming. His comrade managed to fire 2 last bolts into Polixis' left greave and breastplate before his weapon's power pack whined its charge empty. Neither shot penetrated the Space Marine's white battle plate. The apothecary fired a double tap, baka baka, at point-blank range into the man, shredding his muscled body and painting his blood up the walls. He turned to the other, who lay on the floor with several wooden stakes protruding from his abdomen. Polyx's fingers wrapped around the struggling man's throat, then twisted. There was a loud crack, and the cultist became limp in his hands. He tossed him aside, then moved on down the corridor without pause, reloading as he went. Time was running out. The door at the far end of the corridor caved beneath his boot, just as Intercessor Squad Nerva stormed the chamber beyond from the outer side. The dining space resounded with the click-crash of Autobot rifles and the shattering of glass. Polyxis arrived in time to split another of the Tichari in two as he fumbled for a grenade from the bandolier strapped over his chest. The round blew half the cultist's squad away and sent his broken silver grotesque spinning across the room. "The hole is ours," said Sergeant Nerva. "There's no sign of the governor in the servants' quarters," Polyxis added, striding across the room to join the squad as they spread out. "Aerial scans show him being removed to the west of the manor house by the cult," Nerva said, voice grim, while 4 Primaris Marines from his combat team, Ovido, Plinus, Priscor, and Quintillus, secured the battered room, scanning the heretical Tichari corpses. "The captain has ordered an airstrike to neutralize him." Polyxis said nothing. He took a conscious effort to bury the anger that surged through his thoughts. Nerva and the Primaris strike team had arrived at the manor as dawn broke, hoping to recover Governor Delasario before the cult could reach him. Only the ruler of Atari could access the gene vault that contained the codes for the planet's orbiting weapon platforms. Unless the governor was now neutralized, the heretics of the Tichari, demon worshippers who had risen in a coordinated revolt against imperial rule, will have access to weaponry capable of scouring Atari bare. "The western and northern portions of the estate are overrun," Nerva continued. "The captain is moving to secure the vault as we speak, but there are over 400 cult members converging on us. We have orders to evacuate." "What about the daughter?" Polyxis asked. "Her gene stamp will be as effective as his." "My second combat squad were searching for her, but their flanks are overwhelmed and time is tight," Nerva said. "If both father and daughter are lost to the cultists, we need to extract and consolidate at the vault. The heretics cannot be allowed to access it." Polyxis was about to reply when the heads-up tactical display scrolling across his visor pinged. "The second combat team are taking casualties," he said. The sigils that represented the vitae signs of the 2 members of the Intercessor Squad, Ska Evola and Tullio, had both blinked yellow. A second later, the clipped tones of Tarquin, leader of the 5-man detachment, cracked over the voxling. "More cultists entering from the west, at least a platoon in strength, including heavy stabbers. Still no sign of the girls. Another minute and we'll be intersected." "Withdraw," Nerva ordered. "We are out of time." Even as the automatic confirmation blinked over the visor, the vox was chopped by the furious thundering noise of a heavy weapon, playing counterpoint to the beat echoing through the manor. The mark representing Tullio's life feed turned red. Brother Tullio has been hit," Tarquin said. Words barked over the crashing sounds of a close-range firefight. "His Belisarian furnace triggered, but he has been cut off." "Withdraw," Nerva reiterated. "I am not returning to the Fulminata having lost half of my squad." "His progenoids must be recovered," Polyxis interjected. "If they are tamed to retrieve his body, they will suffer more casualties. The Codex is clear on this matter. There is too much to lose for too little gain." "I was not suggesting your intercessors retrieve him," Polyxis said. "It is my duty to retain his legacy for the chapter." "With all due respect, brother apothecary, I could not countenance losing you either. This building is too large and complex to secure, and cultists are flocking here every second we delay. The more of us that fall, the more emboldened they will become." Tarquin will be drawing the main body of the Tishari after him. I can use the tactical display to outflank them and get to Tullio. The speed of the cultist assaults ensures they will not have time to mount a static defense. Nerva was silent for a moment before speaking again, his tone reluctant. You know I cannot stop you, brother apothecary, but we will be gone from this accursed place in under 10 minutes. If you are not on board the extraction, there will be angrier brothers among the Fulminata than just Captain Demetrius. I will see you aboard the extraction, Sergeant Nerva, Pollux promised, already moving towards the Pole's main door. Pollux strode out of the dining hall, ball pistol raised. Data bursts transmitted between the withdrawing intercessors after senses had mapped out much of the manor on the heads-up display, but presented no information about the location of the Tichari supplicators. There were half a dozen corridors and rooms between the apothecary and the withdrawing combat squad, but the cultists in their leering silver masks were flooding into the estate grounds from all directions. Tarquin and his brethren could already be cut off. The apothecary passed down a narrow, bare service corridor and into the kitchen block. Gleaming work surfaces, stoves, and ovens stretched away from him. He entered through the swing doors just as armed cultists with eye-achingly blasphemous sigils painted onto their bare breasts and arms emerged at the opposite end. Pollux fired first. Baka! One of the Tishari went down, his left shoulder reduced to a bloody ruin. The other briefly hesitated, frozen between fight and flight. He chose fight. A single last bolt blew a cluster of hanging herbs to dust and ricocheted from a spread of cutlery laid out beside one of the kitchen drainage units. The man did not have a chance to release another shot before Pollux ended his existence. The apothecary passed through the kitchen, bolt pistol tracking behind the counters and meat cryo blocks for targets, yet there were none. He stepped over the two bodies, scanning them as he passed through the doorway and into the corridor. One cultist's vital signs still showed, but were close to flatlining. He was unconscious and would be dead from blood loss in just over a minute. The apothecary did not pause. He moved down the secondary service passageway and up a short flight of steps into a storage locker, stepping between barrels of salted meats, dried fruits, and heavy sacks of flour. Beyond, he met the remains of Tarquin's combat team. Apothecary, the intercessor said as Pollux emerged into a small annex connecting to the manor's libraries. 4 members of the team were present, Sergius, Valent, and Tarquin, standing over the prone form of Scaevola. He had clearly been dragged from their last contact zone. His breastplate had been split by 3 heavy-caliber hard-round impacts, and numerous small arms shots perforated the scarred ceramite. We were caught in crossfire as we retreated from the foyer, Tarquin said as Pollux knelt beside Scaevola, a hint of bitterness creeping into his clipped report. We tried to reach the governor, but there were too many. Well over 100 contracts. They used their own bodies as shields so they could get him away from us. Pollux didn't answer as his diagnoster helmet scanned the patient, linking with the output of his armor's after-senses via the black carapace interface. The rune representing Scaevola on the vitae display blinked red. Still, he ran a diagnostic over the body anyway, plunging into his prognosticator into Scaevola's tacet node. The secondary readout confirmed the first. He was beyond the apothecary's skill. He's slain, Pollux said, simply indicating his narthesium. I must remove his progenoids immediately. While Tarquin checked the tactical updates, Pollux's blink triggered his reductor. The tool, built into the gauntlet of his narthesium, came in 2 parts, a fine-toothed carbon alloy chain blade extractor and an adamantium drill bit. It was the latter that he activated first, placing it firmly against the center of Scaevola's breastplate. There was the familiar shriek of cracking plasteel, and Pollux gritted his teeth as the drill bored its way through first blue-painted ceramite, then the plasteel beneath. After an exact depth of penetration readout on the apothecary's modified helmet display, he removed and deactivated the bit, placing the reductor's extractor tube in the perfectly circular hole now in Scaveola's armor. Polyxis pressed down. The sharpened edges of the reductor pierced the toughened flesh, penetrating the durametallic sinew coil cables all Primaris Marines were blessed with. He grunted as he carried on through bone, the full weight of the modified gauntlet required to pierce the fused abdomen. There was a hideous crunching sound. Polyxis twisted his fist and activated the reductor's flesh clamps to keep the wound open as he burrowed into the split chest cavity. His visor display had linked with the thumbnail-sized picked responder fixed to the top of the tube's end. With it, he was able to see the reductor as it penetrated Scaveola once more. Before him was a grey glob of fleshy tissue, the very life force of the chapter made manifest. He pressed his tube's end over the progenoid and activated the suction valve. There was a whirring noise as it ripped the precious gland from the flesh, shunting it into one of the cryoreceptacle vials fixed to the Narthesium's rear. As he removed the tube, there was a screech of lasbolt against ceramite behind him, followed by rapid return fire. Bucka, 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 bucka. Polyxis looked over his shoulder and saw Sergius and Valent loose shots into the horde of cultists that swelled from between the librarious bookshelves. Polyxis knew he needed to hurry. He triggered the reductor's small chain blade. Normally, what he was about to do would be considered sacrilege, but under the circumstances of a field operation, it was necessary. He tilted Scaveola's helmet back, exposing the gorget's neck seal. With a precise, sharp slashing motion, he cut open the spacemarine's throat. As blood flooded the gorget, he inserted the reductor's flesh clamps to keep the wound from automatically sealing, and then buried his fingers in with incision. A few seconds of probing located the fallen warrior's second progenoid, secreted in the neck. He cupped it and applied a slow but firm pressure, ripping away the connective tissue and dragging the gland undamaged from his spot nestled against the trachea. With a bloody grey matter in one gauntlet, he slipped it into the reductor's tube and triggered the suction valve once more. The second extracted LynxC joined the first. The chrono display that had triggered on his diagnoster's visor froze as the secondary progenoid thumped into the small cryoreceptacle. The entire operation had taken just 56 seconds. "He's recovered," Polyxis said, intoning the right of the fallen. "His legacy endures." "We will take his body and battle plate with us," Tarquin said, motioning for Valent to heft Scaveola's remains. "Come, brother apothecary. Sergius and Valent will provide cover." "No," Polyxis replied. "I must extract brother Tullio's progenoids. She cannot be reached. Perhaps from the road you have taken. Trying to locate Tullio in these conditions is unwise," Tarquin countered. "It is unorthodox," Polyxis corrected. "But war is rarely an orthodox manner, brother Tarquin." A colossal explosion rocked the manor house, shattering its glass windows and doors. The brothers fell silent, and the unmistakable stench of burning flesh filled the air. Static crackled across the Vox channel. "Aerial strike successful. The governor has been terminated." Polyxis' mouth set in a grim line. "Link up with Sergeant Nerva. I will see you during the extraction." As the second combat team fell back towards the dining hall, Polyxis took the third door out of the annex corridor, avoiding the Tishari cultists that had flooded the libraries. Following the tactical map, he broke down the door leading to a small study room, then turned north once more into the safe, stately entrance corridor leading from the manor's western entrance foyer into the building. It was there that he found brother Tullio. Neither the artificial miracle of MK-10 power armor, nor the organic miracle of a fused ribcage and Primaris sinew coils had been enough to save him from the fist-side wounds caused by the point-blank discharge of a heavy stabber. He was slammed against one of the walls halfway down the corridor, the bloody remains of supplicator corpses scattered around him. The Ultramarine's Belisarian furnace, the so-called revitalizer, had allowed him to endure far longer than was normal for a space marine. He had continued crushing skulls and snapping necks in a frenzied close-quarter melee that had brought enough time for the rest of his brothers to withdraw deeper into the sprawling manor. Polixis took it all in with a split-second assessment. He also noted the masked cult members advancing cautiously down the far end of the corridor. A burst of bolt rounds, baka 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 baka, sent them scrambling back to where they had set up their heavy stubber. Polixis stepped back around the corridor's corner. A last bolt snapped past. Pew, pew! Viewing what his memory had recorded from the several sounds of an obstructed side. For a moment, beyond trying to delay the cultist's rush, he could not see why Tullio had chosen this particular corridor to make his stand, but then he noticed a twitch of frightened movement in one of the alcoves dispersed intermittently down the walls. There was someone between the Tishari at the far end and Polixis' position. A small girl pressed into one of the corridor's bust niches, cowering behind the likeness of one of her ancestors. It was Governor de Lasario's missing daughter. Polixis assessed the situation. The attempt to reach Tullio, who had fallen so close to the cultist's hastily assembled weapon emplacement, will be difficult. There was also Sky Vola's remains to consider. If Polixis fell invading that Tichari's position, not only will the chapter lose Sky Vola's genetic inheritance, but his own and Tullio's too. Yet Polixis could not simply abandon his fallen brother. In his mind's eye, so once again the intercessor he had shared over a decade of combat operations with, in the heat of battle at prayer, servicing his arms and armor. That he had fallen was not what tore at the apothecary, for they would all fall someday in the Emperor's service. It was the possibility of losing his legacy, forever cutting off his inheritance by failing to retrieve his gene seed, that made Polixis hesitate. Then there was the girl. It will be impossible to reach Tullio while keeping her from the crossfire. He could naturalize her to ensure she'd not fall into the hands of the cult, and instead retrieve Tullio's gen seed. But doing so would mean sacrificing access to the vault. Brother Tarquin has rejoined us, and the Thunderhawk is coming, clicked Nerva's voice over the box. Hurry, apothecary. In that instant, the decision was made. He swung out from his cover, bolt pistol thundering, baka, baka, baka. Blood blossomed, and last fire returned as the clutch of separatists responded. Breaking down the corridor, Polixis was exposed for barely 3 seconds, but with his heightened senses it felt like long minutes. He saw each last bolt as it arced down the narrow space, glittering crimson lances that flared and burned as they punched holes through wallpaper and wooden panels. He felt the impact of 3 hits against his power armor, warning runes winking across his visor as the bolts seared black holes into white ceramite. He felt a sudden jolt of pain as a fourth, set to its maximum megathule range, drew blood from his thigh. The sensation was gone in an instant, smothered by the pointed mix of combat steams pumping through his body. The Tichari supplicators were still struggling to reload the stubborn's belt feed as he slammed into the alcove the girl was sheltering in. He knocked the bust aside to make space in the niche, the pale marble thumping across the carpeted floor. The child stared up at him and screamed. "Be still," Polixis said, trying not to snap. The child pressed herself against the wall, tears streaming down her face. Polixis beat back a curse and leaned back into the corridor, losing off a shot, baka, to keep the supplicators' heads down. Another flurry of lasts, pew, pew, cracked back at him, searing holes in the woodwork. He knelt before her, reached out up to his gorget and clamped his diagnostor helmet. "My name is Polixis," he said, hoping speaking to her face to face will calm her long enough to convince her not to try and flee out into the shot-lashed corridor. "We must leave now." She stared at him with wide eyes, apparently stunned to find the great battle-plated automaton was suddenly flesh and blood. albeit with the broad, solid features of a giant. Finally she nodded. "Hold into my arm," he said, offering his left gauntlet. She looked at the wicked, bloody blades of his reductor and the pulsing, fleshy genocide locked in the Nathisium's cryoreceptacle. Another flurry of last bolts, pew, 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 cracked past her hiding place. She took his arm, warping her skinny limbs around his ceramite. Polixis lifted her easily and cradled her against his broad breastplate. He gave his vox. "Sergeant Nerva, I have the governor's daughter." Without waiting for a response, he stepped out into the corridor, back facing the supplicators, and began to run. Almost immediately, his body registered penetrating shots to the rear joint of his left knee, thigh, and lower right side of his back. These injuries didn't slow him. Thankfully, none had found vital organs or struck bone. He kept going as more crimson bolts arced over and past him, keeping his unarmored head bowed and the girl cradled in front of him. He was nearly at the corner when the heavy stabber opened fire. Its battering discharge filled the narrow space, and the air swarmed with splinters and glass shards as a storm of high-caliber rounds ripped up the woodwork and wallpaper around the apothecary. A trio of shots clanged and scored his backpack before one punched a hole into the small of his back. He grunted but kept going. Serv was wiring, boots pounding the carpet underfoot. A side door ahead of him swung open and two more cultists with guns began to emerge, eyes wide in their black masks. Polixis hit the door shoulder first without a pause. The pauldron banging the wood back into the men's faces and throwing them into the room they had emerged from. Another stabber round slammed into the back of his right thigh. He stumbled, his right hand hitting the wall as his armor stabilizers kicked in and he found his balance. A few steps more. Another injury to his right leg, the calf this time. The wounds ached and blood stained his pristine armor red in half a dozen places as the damaged tissue clotted with ugly black scabs. But he was close, so close. A further round hit his right pauldron, ricocheting up into the ceiling and raining plaster down on them. The girl's eyes were screwed tight shut, her whole body tense. A bust to their left disintegrated in a hail of shattered marble as it was hit. Polixis rounded the corner as the storm of gunfire riddled the wall ahead. He paused for the briefest second, letting out a slow, shuddering breath as he scanned the girl and his own injuries. She was unharmed. Through her vital signs, heightened blood pressure and heart rate showed extreme stress. At least 3 of his own wounds would require immediate treatment upon extraction, but they were not yet debilitating. The pain was turning into a familiar dull throb. He mugged his bolt pistol, twisted the primer on a frag grenade to 10 seconds and dropped it on the floor next to the corridor corner. "Nearly there," he said. The girl whimpered. With a grunt of pained exertion, he began to run again, dodging into a study just as the grenade's blast thumped through the building, followed by the screams of their pursuers. The sound of bolt rifle fire filled Polixis with relief as she raced back into the dining hall. Squad Nerva was still in position. The intercessors were firing out of the window, spinning the Tichari, trying to rush in on them from outside while keeping the rolling lawn clear as the vast armored bulk of the Thunderhawk gunship Dromidas came into land, ground plates extended. Shots sparked from the Space Marine flyer and its bolters answered, thundering as they swung back and forth on their pintles, shredding the carefully arranged shrubbery and hedgerows that bordered the lawn. "Not a moment too soon, brother," Nerva said over the cacophony. Behind the sergeant, the Thunderhawk's pro-ramp had turned to lower, revealing the whole interior. The fire from the circling Tichari was intensifying. "Squad embark," Nerva barked. Valent and Plinus lay down covering fire as the Ultramarines broke out across the short grassy space towards the flyer, using their heavily armored bulk to shield the human carried by Polixis from the hard rounds and last bolts that whipped and cracked from all sides. A rocket-propelled grenade coursed through up around the ruined remains of a nearby garden, but pagoda, barely missing the gunship's flanks. "Quintilis, Priscor!" Nerva shouted to the last of his intercessors covering the hall. While the two Primaris Marines stood and dropped back towards the flyer, Polyxis reached the Thunderhawk's hold, carrying the girl to one of the transport benches. As the intercessors came in after him, Nerva glanced down at his Narthesium and saw that only one of the genie seed vials was full. "Tullio?" he asked. Polyxis looked up from the restraint harness he was securing around the wide-eyed girl's shoulders. He shook his head. "I could not reach him. If I had tried, I would not be here now with Scaveola's legacy intact." Nerva said nothing, expression indestructible behind his red and white helmet. He placed one gun under Polyxis' pauldron. "I know that you have done everything in your power to bring him back, apothecary," he said, as the deck of the Dromedas lurched with lifter thrust. "That you went back for him shows your dedication to the chapter and to my squad. We thank you for your efforts." Polyxis inclined his head, not trusting himself to speak. Possessing the governor's daughter would grant them access to the vault and through it victory. That was enough, he told himself. It will have to be enough. As he locked himself into his own harness, the gunship shuddered into a powerful discharge. Its spine-mounted battle cannon had sent a fire-pumped and furnace shell hammer into the manor house through the hall's broken windows. Amidst the silent, violent flurry of flames and smoke, the Dromedas pulled away. The Japal of the Dewsbury was silent. Polyxis' head had been bowed as he related his confession, but he raised it now to meet the red visor lessons of Castor's skull helm. The chaplain reached up and disengaged the sealant lock, removing the green piece of armor and setting it on the altar with a thud. The face revealed was the same as Polyxis, firmly set, dark-eyed, with hair the color of a golden harvest. The similarities went beyond the changes wrought by the Primarch's shared genetics. "Do you remember when I saved the pup from the waters of Icaldon?" the chaplain asked. Polyxis remained looking up at him, processing the question. The fact that Castor had removed his helmet broke with the protocol of his confessional. "I do not," the apothecary admitted eventually. "You know my memories of those days are less complete than yours." "Morik, the Ogre Master's flock hound, had plunged into the river and its pup had followed," Castor said. "Both were swept away. I pursued them, and you would have followed had father not dragged you back. I managed to reach the pup, but its mother was gone. I could not save them both." "A pup is a different matter to a brother of the Fulminata," Polyxis began to say, but Castor raised his hand to silence. "I have only one question for you. Have you come here to confess your guilt to the chaplain of the Fulminata? Or have you come here to confess it to your blood brother?" Polyxis said nothing. "Your silence is an answer in and of itself," Castor said. "You have committed no crime worthy of confession. The tactical situation was clear, and the Codex supports your actions. Tullio was lost, and the fact that you recovered the daughter of the Delasarius was an achievement that you should look back on with pride. With her gene lock, we were able to access the weapons vault and turn the orbital defenses on the heretics. Had it been the other way around, the entire strike force would have been decimated, and the world of Atari lost." "But could I not have recovered both her and Tullio?" Polyxis said. "The Imperium needs warriors now more than ever. The loss of even a single Battle Brother's legacy is a grievous failing. I alone am accountable for that." "The Imperium needs humanity," Castor corrected. "That is the very reason that we exist, to preserve mankind and all of its great works. You are right to speak of legacy. You preserved the legacy when you saved that girl. She will never forget that her life was paid for by one of the Emperor's warriors. In all likelihood, she will grow up to be a firm and righteous leader, ever mindful of the dangers that threaten the Imperium and the warriors that stand ready should she have need." Polyxis said nothing. As he considered his brother's words, Castor went on. "You are right. A pop cannot be compared to the memory of Brother Tullio, but Ugly Master Morik rejoiced when I emerged from the swell with a dog in my arms. He knew that the future of his flock was secure, and the Imperium's future will be secure too, so long as we take the sacrifices required for victory. Atari still stands because you completed the mission. If some of our number are lost, even you or I, in doing so, that is not something to mourn. It is both our duty and our privilege. You shall not hold it against yourself either. What we must suffer on occasion is inevitable. We are warriors. It is a difficult lesson, Polixis admitted. One that I fear I must relearn every time. It still hurts. And that is to your credit, Castor said, extending one gleaming blank armored hand. Polixis grasped it, the white Gundam beating the black, thumb to thumb, the brother's grip rather than the warrior's. He stood. We are a torch set aside for mankind's darkest hour, Castor said. That hour is upon us now. May we burn brightly, you and I, and never waver. We owe that to Tullio's memory and the future lives of those we save. Well, that's it. A short story found in the free White Dwarf excerpt. Pretty fun. Nice story. A Primaris story. I have already made an audio narration of the first prologue of Mark Smiley's Blackheart. I'm waiting for him to give permission to upload it to YouTube because he's the author and I know him personally, so it wouldn't be nice to do this without asking him. Hopefully he'll give it. If he doesn't give it, that's also fine. So I made this shorter story in the meantime to make up for not having a bigger one. Well, that's all, everybody. I hope you had a good May and I hope June comes in well for all of you. The next story, whether that is the Blackheart story or something else, will be uploaded in June. Take care, everybody, and be well.